New legislation tabled this week proposes heavier sentences, new regulatory bodies, and changes to a number of laws, all part of the effort to better protect Canadians and particularly children online.
What I find troubling is that there's more rules for my son's Lego than there is for the most dangerous toy in my home and in every home in this country. And that toy is the screen that your child is on right now, whether that's a phone, a tablet, or a computer screen. And we are changing that with this legislation because protecting kids is fundamentally what this legislation is all about.
Online services will now face new measures aimed at protecting children, including the duty to remove content that sexually victimizes a child within 24 hours, and to introduce special protections to their platforms such as parental controls, content warnings, and safe search settings. Signy Arnason is the Associate Executive Director of the Canadian Centre for Child Protection, which was one of the groups consulted by the government on this bill. Signy Arnason, thanks for your time today. Appreciate you joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So your team was consulted on this legislation. Do you feel the government hit the mark with the measures it rolled out yesterday?
Well, we think it's critical that we have an online harms bill. We have to get regulations in place. We've been on the front lines for 20 years facing the mass devastation occurring to children, and year over year it's getting worse. So we are pleased that this has been tabled, and we look forward to supporting the process as it moves along.
So your organization operates cybertips.ca, which is the national tip line for reporting online sexual exploitation of children. So you're right there on the front lines of this. What did you tell the government you needed to help you in that effort?
Well, we talked all about the issues we're facing, within the spectrum of harm occurring for kids. That goes from the little ones being sexually abused within homes by someone that they know. It's recorded and then distributed online, and are sending upwards of 20,000 notices every single day to providers around the globe to get that material removed. And then moving all the way into teens, youth becoming more independent online, and the issues that they're facing with online sexual violence. I mean, that's increased by 255% for us as an organization since the pandemic. So that would involve online luring, the non-consensual sharing of intimate images, kids being sextorted. So we basically shared the explosion of harms that just get worse year over year, and we need to make tech companies accountable for the products that kids are intersecting with on a daily basis.
Do you think it covers enough of the tech companies? I mean, private messaging is out, some of the chat programs that people use on their phones, and some of the smaller social media platforms and interaction platforms are not necessarily or automatically covered by this legislation. Are there gaps still there, even with this more robust framework that the government rolled out yesterday?
This is an important starting point. It can be incredibly difficult to enter into contemplating, regulating an environment that really has had no guardrails. So we are understanding absolutely of the complexities and trying to manage that. Do we think there could be more added? Sure. File hosts are not included. So we see a lot of child sexual abuse material as well as adolescent content that will be uploaded onto those services. These are the types of things that we'll be sharing during the committee hearings. Overall, though, we're incredibly pleased that, we have a starting point to begin this really critical discussion to reel in a completely, out of control environment that kids were being, really devastated within. So, we'll be talking about those things for sure.
So this starting point also includes a new online safety commission and methods to report harmful content online that should be removed, similar to what your tip line does. How do you see this working? And what should the government be focusing on here through this commission? How do you see it working on a day-to-day practical level?
Well, that's not necessarily our area of expertise. What we know is we're critical in this story. We've been doing this for over 20 years, as you mentioned, operating the national tip line. We're receiving, 2,000 to 3,000 reports a month from Canadians over and above the work that we're doing with the tool called Project Arachnid. So we are really important in the mix of this. It's really difficult to assess this just based on the bill. So many of those nuanced details come when the regulations are put into play. So we may have 50% of the story, But there's no question that it's going to be critical that our organization is working with the commission as well as the ombudsperson in addressing online sexual victimization against children.
The bill is quite specific on what needs to be removed immediately, the type of content that needs to be removed immediately, and it was narrowed deliberately, as I'm sure you're aware, to avoid concerns about overreach and inhibiting freedom of speech. But could the narrow focus have other unintended consequences? Could it be too narrow and leave some gaps in the protection, in your view?
Well, again, I get back to the fact that this is a starting point, and you then come out of the gate and you start building upon what you see may be potentially missing. I mean, we're really pleased to see that the focus is on a duty to protect children. That is a cornerstone of the bill. So how this bill, which will eventually hopefully be law, will be interpreted will be based on that. So that's pretty essential. There's issues related to, children being sexually victimized and survivors, their images being out online that have been identified that were really, really critical. There's also addressing issues like physical abuse and the recording of that and the distribution online in terms of inciting violence. So those are really important things that I think the government was listening to in relation to what we were seeing. Can more be done? Always, but again, this is just the beginning of the journey within Canada, but it's a critical step. We have to start somewhere.
There were concerns with the original attempts to deal with online harms that maybe the government was going a bit too far and it was going to interfere with people's right to express unpopular opinions online. There's been some criticism of this, not so much on the child protection side, but maybe on the criminal justice changes. The Conservatives are saying that maybe this goes a little bit too far in terms of banning opinions that contradict what they call the Prime Minister's radical ideology. What's your sense of the balance the government struck there in terms of dealing with the child protection stuff and then also bringing in the criminal code and the speech restrictions to deal with sort of the continuum of harm that's out there?
Well, I think a huge focus in this bill is around children, and that is so urgently needed. And we have been desperately calling for that. This can't continue. And the idea that somehow criminal law is going to get us out of this bad mess is really short-sighted. Because at the end of the day, what that suggests is we're permitted to let children first be harmed, and then we'll do some patchwork with law enforcement stepping in and all the other systems that are in place. This isn't good enough. We shouldn't be allowing this level of devastation to be occurring for children. So these regulations really acknowledge that these companies that have released these products and services into market, which children so regularly intersect with, simply are not safe. So we think this is a bold and important step. We're not in the business of commenting on the hate side of this file, but I can tell you what the government has put in this bill in relation to children is desperately needed, and we are really encouraged by this step.
Signy Arnason, thank you so much for your time today.
Thanks for having me.